While it is loading up, we'll say our normal prayer, which happens to be the peace prayer for the Katha Upanishad. Om Sahanavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Viddhishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So today we start our study of the Katha Upanishad. Today I will simply give an introduction, an overview, so that we understand just generally this Katha Upanishad. First of all, the Katha Upanishad is an Upanishad which is very dear to many people. It is probably one of my most favorite Upanishads. You'll see that I quote from it quite often. And we see that it is, even in the title, a play on words, because Katha means literally distress. And so all of us use that as a starting point. Are we distressed, and how do we get out of it? And sets also the scene for the introduction of this Upanishad. But it is also the name of a great sage that is credited with the author of the branch of the Krishna Yajurveda, from which this Upanishad is said to be derived. And it's also the term of a female pupil or follower of the Katha school of the Yajurveda. And another closely pronounced word to this Katha literally means a story, a legend, something that is told, and that's very appropriate because it begins off, it's in the context of a story. This story is a very ancient story. It is the Katha Upanishad, while ancient, has been referred to in the Rig Veda, but it has also had a great influence on thinkers and philosophers, East and West. And it's an important source of Sanskrit poetry and thought, deep thought, that is there from ancient Hinduism. The famous American poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he held this Katha Upanishad very highly. He credited the Katha Upanishad for the central story at the end of his essay on immortality, as well as his poem Brahma, and also the famous Irish poet that we all know and love, William Butler Yeats, also dedicated several essays and sonnets to the themes in the Katha Upanishad. Also, there was a verse in the Katha Upanishad that inspired the title and the epigraph of the great writer Somerset Maugham's famous 1944 novel called The Razor's Edge. This is after the famous verse, that the beginning of which, of course, is quoted by Swami Vivekananda and translated in this way as a rallying call for all of us. Arise, awake, stop not till the goal is reached. And it says that all this spiritual practice and this understanding of the truth is very delicate and subtle. It is like the sharp edge of a razor at night. Difficult is the path, like treading on the razor's edge. So there are some characters that we'll introduce you to, of course. First of all, the characters around, there are three characters in this whole story, in this whole unfolding view Upanishad. The one is Nachiketa himself. And Nachiketa, it not is derived, of course, from a Sanskrit term. It indicates that Nachiketa is an ideal student. We see that the derivation of the word indicates this. And then we also have his father, Vajasrafasa, that literally really means one desirous of heavenly rewards. Sravas is Sanskrit, it means fame. And so essentially, also it means, Vaja means making a gift, a food gift specifically. So we can see that the story and how it unfolds, the characters are very symbolic of this. This Upanishad has a wonderful gift for using these double words, double entendres, so that we can nicely meditate on the true meaning of this. The characteristic of Nachiketas is characteristic of the two primary qualities that are required in spiritual life, namely Shraddha and Nishtha. Nishtha, perseverance. We have to have perseverance. Swami Vivekananda gives us a number of P's to help us in our spiritual life. This is purity, perseverance, and patience. These are the three things that are required. So this Katha Upanishad, we can break down into a few components. As I mentioned, it is actually the Katha Shaka from the Krishna Yajurveda. Two versions of the Yajurveda are there for those who understand. One is referred to as the black Krishna. Krishna means black. And one is the Shukla, the white recension. These are surviving. Don't forget, much of the Upanishads and the Vedas is lost to us. It is deemed to be the most poetic and charming presentation of the sublime. And these teachings of the Vedanta are not intellectual teachings, they are mystical parts of philosophy. Two aspects of philosophy we can understand. One, for example, from the German philosophers, the Western German philosophers, and Immanuel Kant and so on. And these are rational theories, if you will, of how reality is and how we come to use it and how we come to see it. That's one part of it. But really, these Upanishads are really mystic philosophy. That is, it guides us in a practical way, inwards. And so I mentioned that two of these characters are there, Nachiketas, who represents the ideal student that is full of Shraddha, faith. Now, this is not the normal sort of sense that we use the word Shraddha, faith. Faith actually is a mental attitude. It's constituted primarily of sincerity of purpose, humility, reverence, and an unwavering conviction, because on the other side of the scale is blind faith. So absolutely no doubt. And Nachiketas is deemed to be only about 12 years old, so has the innocence of youth also, the truthfulness, the honesty. And so this is one of the basic virtues that we have to cultivate, is absolute trust. When we consider the world around and its resources, then it evokes a sense of trust. This kind of attitude is sometimes called holism. Not holism in a philosophical sense, that comes from the philosopher Jan Smuts, but holism in the sense that If we take a tree with its roots, with its branches, with its trunk, with its capacity to bring up nutrients from the soil, with its capacity to take in energy through the process of photosynthesis, to take in carbon dioxide and so on, the whole life that we call tree, if we only focus on tree, we forget the context. The whole context is there. Sunshine has to be there, air has to be there, water has to be there. And when we look at it correctly, you'll see the whole universe is contributing toward this phenomenon of tree. If we just see it as tree, we'll dismiss it. And then we might be reductionists. We might take it apart. How does the trunk work? How do the cells of this tree work, and so on and so forth, and miss the whole context. This is very important in our outlook, cultivating our outlook. Because if we don't look at the context of things, we're likely to be socially narrow. We're likely to be religiously narrow. And when I was in Cork, a group of people came to see me, and they made a comment, something equivalent to, I'm not religious. And that kind of puzzled me, because the Western way of saying it is normally taken to be, I'm agnostic or atheistic, something along those lines. But that's not what they meant at all. What they meant was that they were not convinced that ritualistic practice was in any way meaningful. And they were brought up with very straight and narrow concepts and straight and narrow actions, ritualistic actions that had to be performed. And they didn't understand why. It seemed to have no meaning for them. And quite rightly, it was relegated into the category of superstition. All blind faith basically carries with it superstition. And so that's not what the Western way of understanding it. It's not that they didn't believe in God, for example, or in some inner moving entity, or that they did not have a worship of whatever it was, Krishna, Rama, Shiva, etc. Not at all. They had great, great faith in that. But it was in the ritualistic portion, they had no faith. And when we come to this father of Nachiketas, which is Vajasravas, he is performing a ritualistic action that is aimed at sustaining his merit in the afterlife. In the ancient days, this is how they performed sacrifices. And actually, the particular sacrifice was Vishwajit. That is, that it is done ekaka, once only. So once in a lifetime ritualistic action that is performed. And on this occasion, you give away all your possessions, everything, the whole thing. But there is a motive behind it. If I do this, I gain merit. And what's the use of merit? If the body comes and goes and dies, it's merit for the afterlife. So death is seen, quite rightly, as a kind of comma, not a full stop. And if I can gain merit in this life, how will I sustain it and get the effects of it, the fruits of it, in the afterlife? That's the reason why you would do such a thing. But evidently, Vajasravas, he thinks it is that just doing the ritualistic action without putting in sincerity, truthfulness, just doing the actions will create the merit. This is in the realm of, to some extent, superstition. I've been told if I do this action, I'll get the merit in the afterlife. But the quality of the action was not understood. So he thinks that he can get away with offering the very bare minimum. The lowest quality of offerings should be given. And so in this way, he does this. And Nachiketas, who is dedicated to truthfulness, sees the difficulty. And out of love for his father, he says, oh, wait, this is not going to get the merit that you think it's going to get, because the merit is in the intention behind it. The mobilizing force for everything is your thought, your intention. That is the seed that bears fruit in the future. So this whole Katha Upanishad is dealing with this issue of immortality, of death, of what is the truth. And so for this reason, there is a challenge. The noble Brahmin, no doubt, Jashrava, has this young son, Nachiketa, and he undertakes to perform this Vedic rite. But the sharp eye of Nachiketa sees the flaw in it. He says, if you're going to give away all these gifts and alms, basically, to all those sadhus and brahmins and rishis and so on, then the cows that you give have to be of the best quality. And what his father is giving away is elderly cows, used up, barren cows, cows measured. The measure of wealth in those days was in cows. And so realizing this, that it wasn't in the correct spirit of the rite, and becoming concerned, of course, for the welfare and the repercussions on his father, he draws his father's attention to this issue. Again and again by asking, to whom will you give me away, dear father? Now this whole story is actually repeated in the Tachirya Brahmana as well, just to point this one out. And the story varies slightly in this. But the third character is Yama. Yama is the controller of human destiny. He is the prime controller, in fact, of human destiny. And again, we find a play on words, because if anybody has a secret of immortality, real immortality, immortality that is an infinite existence, not just a temporary reward in the afterlife, it would be this Yama, who knows everything. He knows the realm of the ancestors, and he knows the secret to immortality. And so it's put like that. But of course, the catchphrase is that he is also Yama, that's the Sanskrit for control. So we are all under the control of birth, life, and death. We can't escape it. We're all here for a short adventure, and we have to attend to it at some point. Most people ignore the fact. It comes to our attention when a near one or a much loved one suffers and there's a threat of death, or somebody actually dies. And we take it as a tragedy. Of course, for the dying person, it's not like that. It's simply a transition. Every night we have a dress rehearsal for it. We go into a deep sleep. We vacate our egoistic position, our personality identification in a waking state. And we even go beyond an adventurous series of events created by the unconscious mind called dream. And we go into this dreamless sleep causal state. And then we reincarnate, if you want to put it like that, into a waking state. So this transition has no fear in it, actually. The difficulty is for those left behind. For those left behind, they think that it is a very terrible thing. Look what happened to the person, they died. Now, you see, if the person doesn't understand that, then death becomes something that is frightening. Because a dying person will lose everything. The person left behind is losing one person. But the dying person is leaving behind all their possessions, everything. And this is a wonderful, subtle lesson referred to in this ritual, I'm giving up everything. Are you really? The dying person is giving up their bank account, their house, their relatives, their family, all their possessions, their clothing, everything, their identity. And so actually, if a person understood that and was clinging on to these things and not be prepared for a peaceful transition, then no doubt it would be traumatic. So Nachiketa draws his attention to the inadequacy of this right and asks, to whom will you give me away, dear father? Because after all, if you're giving everything away, the son also can be considered a possession. And his intention is to balance out the inferior gifts by, if you offer me, that will help balance on the one side the inferior gifts, so on the other side is me. I'm young, I'm full of life, that's the idea. And surely all the deities that you're offering to will be pleased with such gifts. And his insistence becomes an annoyance to his father. And so the constant interruption of his son, he shouts, I will give you away to Yama, the Lord of Death. In other words, he's saying, go to hell. To you, I'll give you death. Go there. And immediately, of course, regrets it, as any father would regret it. But this is an age when your word is your bond. If you say something, it has to be carried out. Absolutely. And so it has to be honored at any cost. And so Nachiketa muses on his fate and consoles his distraught father as best he can and sets off for the abode of Yama, the Lord of Death. Of course, as it turns out, the Lord of Death is not there. And that's a difficulty because Yama is a householder. Nachiketa is a brahmachari and a Brahmin to boot, Brahmin brahmachari. And there's a great consequence. There are 3 consequences for each day you stay there, because he stayed for 3 days in the heavenly abode with no drink, no water, nothing. And in the Taittiriya version, the Nachiketa is instructed in some answers. What did you eat? What did you drink? And so he has to answer that on day 1, I ate your offspring. And on day 2, I ate your cattle, that is your wealth. And day 3, I ate your, merit. So that's a kind of curse that goes with ignoring somebody, these 3 things. Offspring is important to carry on the genetic line. And then, of course, to sustain yourself, to consume all your wealth. In other words, there's a consequence. And so to compensate for this, Yama is obliged to offer him 3 boons, 3 gifts. So the whole first section of this Katha Upanishad is to do with that. On the board, and I don't know if you can see that, I've told you here that the Katha Upanishad is in 2 sections. 2 chapters, actually. And chapter 1 has 3 sections and chapter 2 has 3 sections. So actually, if you put it all together without commentary, etc., it's quite a short Upanishad, but most profound because it carries some of the important analogies and lessons that we find in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Many things, people seem to think that there's some kind of connection there. Obviously, there's a connection there. For example, the parable of a chariot is used. The Ashwatha tree is used. There are many particular analogies that are used in this and concepts. So the first chapter, I've given you a summary on the board of some subject matter that is followed. So let's have a look at this. I hope you can see it. Anybody cannot see it, I'll try and bring this closer here. All right, and walk you through this. All right. So first of all, the first subject matter would be the situation that I have described, and we can study that in greater detail. It gives a background. And then these three boons are there, these three gifts. But the real teaching really starts when it is identified that there are two paths that we have to take. We have always this choice. We have a free will to say, will we take something that is preferable to take? This also is echoed in Bhagavad Gita as well. Or will we take the pleasurable? And right from the start, two of these three boons are happily granted by Yam. He can easily give them. First boon is, will you pacify my father who must be anxious about my encounter with you, and also will I come back, will I be gone forever? So please, can you give him some reassurance? What a generosity of spirit this Nachiketa has. And so he can easily grant that. Not only does he grant that, but he says, you'll return to your father. Second boon is, can you teach me the ritualistic process whereby all the merit that is accumulated will continue? Most people are looking for that. So if you can teach me that, that'll be fine. That he will easily grant. But the third boon is the most difficult. Can you teach me this secret of immortality itself? And so Yama is very hesitant to grant this because, as he says, even the deities don't understand this. It's very difficult. But he also understands Nachiketa's purity of heart. These two qualities speak there. That is the quality of perseverance and faith. Faith and perseverance. And he already has this purity that is inherent in this term, Shraddha. And then he says, okay, there's a superiority of wisdom. If I follow this difficult path, which is the preferable path as opposed to pleasurable. Most people would choose the pleasurable. And Yama offers so many things. Please don't ask this third boon. I can give you anything. In other words, I can take you along the path of pleasure if you want. Most people will choose power and pleasure, these two things. But Nachiketa says no. He understands the value of wisdom. And so Yam teaches him about the superiority of wisdom over wealth. And then the next thing that we have to do, and this of course is our own spiritual journey as well. And so this apprehension of the truth, we can see this truth through a system of adhyatma yoga, that is the sense of self-reflection that leads us to meditation. Essentially, meditation is a path. And then the key, practical key, the value of Om as a sound symbol that helps us to understand the importance of this. And then to discuss this eternal self, because the basis of all of this is to understand behind us, within us, the fundamental basis, this blissful base that we call myself, is actually an eternal self. It doesn't come, it doesn't go, it doesn't die, it doesn't struggle. It is constant, it is undivided, it is unchanging. And then what is the opposite of the supreme, in contrast, has to be taught. And what moral preparation, the practical portion of this, away from the principle. What is the moral preparation that we require? What does this preferable path, what are the components of it? What do we have to do? We begin off with a morality. In the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, this is also called Yama. This moral precepts that will help to purify the mind. And to highlight that, there are two selves which are going on. The self we normally take for granted as me, and then the immortal one, which is there. And then this chariot analogy is used in connection with that. We can update the concept and say, like having a car. Those who know me will understand. I rephrase this body, not my body, not I, not mine, as the earth car. My earth car that goes for a period of time, no doubt. At some stage it breaks down, it has to be maintained. But eventually it will become old. And if I want to continue my journey, I have to have at least a 2021 model or whatever the model is at the time. And then a good teacher will steer you to this highest with a progressive understanding. This is the grossest, this is more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. So there's an order of progression toward this, and there is a method that will take you toward the highest apprehension and realization of this immortal self. So the first chapter, this is what is laid out. As we go on, we'll do the same thing for the second chapter. So this gives you a good overview of what is the Katha Upanishad, and gives you a good sense of the geography of it. So we can begin then, and if you have a question, of course, you can interject, interrupt. So that's all in good order. Otherwise, we'll just start our study with the first stanza as laid out. We're all okay? Good. All right. So let us see what we've got here. Now, if you're following the 8 Upanishads, what you'll see that up front, there is a big commentary Shankaracharya gives. So this is derived from this 8 Upanishads, volume 1, that we have been using all along. It is a translation by Swami Purnananda, 11th president of the Ramakrishna order. And so we'll read it out in brief and see if we can clarify the approach, why this is being told. He starts off with his own salutation, and he's saluting Bhagavan, that is one who has knowledge of creation, dissolution, of the worlds of birth and death, creatures, and of ignorance and knowledge, namely Yam. So death. Death, mythologically and traditionally, is the son of the sun, that is the life-giving element, and the imparter of knowledge of Brahman. So also salutation to the student, Nachiketa. So now he says, a brief exposition of the cantos of the Katha Upanishad is begun. Why is it begun? For the sake of making their import easily comprehensible. Then he gives in 2 places, but here he's giving a definition of what we mean by Upanishad. He says it's derived from upa, near, ni, that is with certainty, as prefixes, and grip as a suffix to the root shad, meaning to split up or destroy or go or reach, attain or loosen. And so by the word Upanishad, he says, is denoted the knowledge of the knowable entity presented in the book that is going to be explained by virtue of what relation with any particular significance of the word Upanishad, again, is knowledge denoted by the word Upanishad. Knowledge is called Upanishad by virtue of its association with the significance. It splits up, injures or destroys the seeds of worldly existence, such as ignorance, etc. In the case of those seekers of emancipation who, after becoming detached from the desire for the seen and the unseen, In other words, when we are studying these texts, it is not really an intellectual study just for our accumulation of knowledge. It is not an academic study. The reason why we study these things is to get this internal, everlasting knowledge. Knowledge in two ways. The knowledge of what is the nature of the world, because we then understand what is the nature of the relative reality. And in contrast to that, what is the nature of the absolute reality? In another place, of course, it is told that upa, that is near, sitting near is the idea. You're sitting near the teacher. You can imagine this being taught. And you can imagine also Nachiketa's position as well, of sitting near the teacher. Often the concept is sitting at the feet of the teacher in humility. And don't forget, one of the characteristics of the Shraddha is this quality of humility. So it goes on to say, therefore, that in order to do this, an approach has to be made. And the knowledge, ultimate knowledge, that is called Upanishad. That bears the characteristics to be presented hereafter, who then deliberate on it with steadiness and certainty. That is how it is made. Ni, approaching, means receiving through the instruction of the teacher. A deliberate move toward that is also implied. It means to eliminate the idea of impossibility or doubt with regards to such subtle things as the unity of the individual self and the transcendent self. And so he says, thus it will be said later on, knowing that one becomes freed from the jaws of death. All the knowledge of Brahman is called Upanishad because of its connection with the idea of leading to Brahman, inasmuch as it makes the seekers after freedom, who are possessed of the qualities already mentioned, attain the supreme Brahman. So we begin our study with this in mind, that there is a sincere yearning for the freedom that equates to the knowledge of Brahman. And so we said later, having become free from what? Free from virtue and vice. To lead a virtuous and moral life is a means, it's not an end. And ultimately to transcend both good and evil, both virtue and vice, all pairs of opposites. And even the knowledge about fire, who preceded all the worlds, who was born of Brahma and is possessed of enlightenment, and whose knowledge is prayed for by Nachiketa, that is done through the second boon, because how do we sustain the knowledge afterwards? We see the secret, the key to this ritualism centered around fire. And actually, this particular yajna is named after Nachiketa himself. So this we can begin with, and we can go straight then to the first stanza. Now the translation charmingly begins with that. It says, but Ushan ha vai vajasvasa sarva vedasam dadho tasyaha nachiketa nama putra asa. So, desirous of that fruit. Charmingly, the translator puts it, once upon a time, denoting it as a story. The son of Vajasrava, being desirous of the fruit of this particular ceremony, he gives everything away. And he had, as the story goes, a son called Nachiketa. Then what? As the presents were being carried to the brahmanas, the priests and the dignitaries, faith took possession of him who was still a boy. And he thought He goes to those worlds that are known as joyless, who gives away the cows that have drunk water and eaten grass for good, whose milk has been milked for the last time, who are basically dry and old, and which have lost their organs. The cows meant for offering to the Brahmanas are being described, and those by which would come water has been pitam, drunk. Pito dakaha, that is, water has been drunk earlier only, but later on even the power to drink water is absent. So old are they. So inferior cows. Then he says, he thinks with himself, my father must have certainly spoken. Oh, sorry. That's the following page. He said to his father, so Sahovacha Pitaram Tata Kasme Mam Dasyasiti Vitityam Trityam Tam Hovacha Mrityave Tva Dadamiti. So he says, Father, to whom will you offer me? And he spoke to him a second time and a third time. This is not out of cheek or precociousness. This is out of genuine sense of truth and concern for his father. And to him the father said, to death I offer you. To whom will you offer me? To whom will you offer me? It's 3 times and incensed at the thoughts, says the commentator. This one is not behaving like a boy. The father, Vachaha, said, Tam, to him, to his son, Mrityavi, to death, to the son of the son, Dadami, I will give away. So that son, having been spoken to thus, sorrowfully, harshly spoken to, cogitated in a solitary place. And that is being said, among many I rank as belong to the highest, among many I rank as belong to the middling. What purpose can there be of death that my father will get achieved today through me? The innocence of the boy comes out. So, among many, you see, there is one particular scholar on this. He suggests that a mere boy should not be so impertinent, is another reading of it, as to interfere with the doings of the father. And the father basically is saying, go to hell in anger. The boy earnestly wishes to make himself an offering. That's the point. And thus purify his father's sacrifice. It reminds us a little bit of St. Paul, who says, thou fool, that which thou sawest is not quickened except it die. So, among many who are dead, I am in the middle, I am not the last, and many others will still follow me. So actually there's no need for a lamentation about this. He is reflecting as to what help he has to render to young. How can I be of use or service to young? And even anticipating the teachers or the parents' wishes and carrying them out. This is the way of the best of the pupils. Shankara Nanda also has this commentary. And then consider how it was with the forefathers. Behold how it is with the latter or the later people. A mortal ripens like corn. It's a very, very profound and useful statement. It's going like this. Anupasya yata purve pratipasya tata pare. Sasyam iva vartyaha pachyate sasyam iva jayati punaha. consider successively how your forefathers behaved and consider how others behave now. Man decays. I have not much consideration for death being the end of anything. Man decays and dies. We have to accept that. Is there an example for that? Yes. So it is told, man decays and dies like corn, like a cereal food, and emerges again like corn. See, if you plant something in the field, some cereal food to eat, like corn, you know it has its season, and you know you take it and you reap it. Sowing and reaping is really the example given for this by Jesus. And when we talk about karma yoga, I often take away this term to save confusion, to remove any remnants of any fatalism or fatalistic ideas. And I say, replace the idea of karma with this phrase, sowing and reaping. Everybody understands this calls a law. What you sow, you reap. And when you plant something, you sow it, you reap it, but it gets born again. And so immediately the idea of transmigration is brought out in this text. And so having been addressed in this way, the Father sent him for the sake of his own truthfulness, keeping his word. And he, having gone to death's abode, lived for 3 nights, 3 days, 2 days, 3 nights maybe, death being out. And when death returned from his sojourn, his counselors or wives said to him by way of advice, thank you, welcome back. But a Brahmana, a guest, enters the houses like fire. For him, they accomplish this kind of propitiation. O death, carry water for him. And so because of this, he is obliged now to offer him something. When we say carry water, how do we greet a guest? Normally by washing the feet. There's an Oriental custom to take the dust off. Even when we touch somebody who is revered, to touch their feet, it is a token of washing the feet. Much better to actually wash the feet. And this is the same in all Oriental culture, including Jesus's day, where it is required, washing the feet of the guest. And just as people do for a laying conflagration of fire, that is the consequence of a repercussion of this. And just to make sure no evil consequences come about. So he goes, he carries water to Nachiketa for washing the feet as an honored guest. If in anyone's house is the purport, a Brahmana, a guest, bides without food and water, that Brahmana destroys hope and expectation, the results of holy association and sweet discourse, sacrifices and charities, sons and cattle, all these of that person of little intelligence, all of that is gone. So that's why there's an urgency to compensate for this. And so having been told thus, death approaches Nachiketa with adoration. And he says, so, O Brahmana, he addresses him, since you have lived in my house, now, without food and drink for 3 nights, a guest and adorable person as you are, let my salutations be to you, and let good accrue to me by averting the fault arising from that lapse. Ask for 3 boons, 1 in respect for each night. So immediately, what is the first boon? This is the quality of Nachiketa. He says, Shanta samkalpaha sumana yata shadvita manyo Gotamo mavi mrutyo. That Gotama, my father, having recognized, I asked this, that my father Gotama may become freed from anxiety, calm of mind, freed from anger towards me. what a forgiving nature. And he may recognize me and talk to me when freed by you. I can go back and we can talk as usual, as father and son. I ask this for you. Calm his mind and give the assurance that I will be returning to him, and let me return to him.
Could I ask a question just about
Yes.
about 9? Is the point that is there an implication that death is part of is part of Maya in a way, because death is bound to he's bound to the conventions that the Brahmana had not been treated treated in the appropriate way, and that's why he offers the 3 boons, so that Yama himself is subject to the to the rules, for want of a better term. So he's part of conditionality.
Yes, absolutely. So Yama, don't forget, firstly, it's a story. So Yama is a householder, and Nachiketa is a Brahmin. And so there's the Brahmin, one who is dedicated, one who's pure, one who is worthy of adoration. Not only that, but he's a guest. Now there is, of course, a statement in the Untitled Upanishad that tells us, let your mother be a god unto you, father, guru, let your guest be a god unto you also. Because when some guest comes to your place, the practical Vedantic way of seeing that, the correct way of seeing that is, it is God dressed up like that. And so full honor should be given. The guest also is God. So Yama has the capacity to grant these things. That's on the one side. On the other side, he's also avoiding the taking away of merits for him also. So the whole thing is within the context of the relative world. Yes.
Yeah. So that means death is like part of there's that implication in it, that death itself is part of relativity rather than the absolute. That's a sort of implication of the story.
Oh yes, and that is why the illustration of corn is used.
Yeah.
So something is planted, like an ear of corn. You take the ear of corn, you digest, you eat it. The corn will grow again, and the whole thing was planted at some point in time. So there's a beautiful analogy there of sowing and reaping. You could equally say, instead of using an analogy of corn, sowing and reaping, we understand, and there's no end to it. Sowing and reaping is an eternal thing. We have to get out of it somehow. And so we're all under this obligation to Yama.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, how do you get out of it? Through Yama itself, through control. This is the cleverness of the double meanings put into this Upanishad. So quite clearly on the board here, you see the last 12, method has to be there. So there has to be some moral control. You can see also here, the moral preparation has to be there as well. See, so who better to teach you the lesson about immortality than the relativity of birth, life, death, the one who knows it and who controls it.
Yeah. Thank you.
They're a beautiful story and beautifully put in this way. All right, this is all just the background, of course. So we're skipping over much of it. All right, and we have 5 minutes more to go on this. So that was number 9, number 10. All that is allayed. So anyway, what are these 3 boons, these 3 wishes, if you like? Of course, I often tell the children, if somebody like this, a great, great entity, or maybe in modern storytelling, a genie, says, I want to give you three wishes, what should your first wish be? And they give me all kinds of answers. But of course, my reply is unlimited wishes. That should be your first wish. All right. So then Yata Purashtat Bhavita, Yama said, as of old will be he recognizing thee. That is, Udalaki Aruni will be possessed of affection, just as he had before. Seeing you freed from the jaws of death, he will get over his anger and will, with my permission, to sleep happily for many a night. Very beautiful wish that he has for the affectionate restoration of relationships with his father, who he knows has regretted this outburst of anger. All right. There's a small note. So the suffix in udalaki may not add any meaning to the original word, udalaka, or it may significant the son of udalaka. In that case, of course, it becomes a san. And this was also possible when a brotherless girl was given in marriage and so on and so forth. It simply says, if you interpret that it is maybe just the eldest son. Okay, so then in heaven, there is no fear in the whole thing. Now, just an explanation on what I've just told you. Udalaka is the son of Aruna. And the father of Svetaketu is also called Aruni. And this we pick up from the Chandogya Upanishad with reference to this. And so the idea is mat prashtaha, through my favor, I'm giving you this. And of course, in the previous verse also, we had this tvat prashtasam, that is taken to be set free by you. So like that. There are other commentaries on this verse, even from Western commentators. The Indologist Dusan also has retained this original reading, but also gives a slightly different rendering. He says that Udalaki, Aruni, will be just as before. That is happy. He'll be happy when I am released from these worlds. That's really what it is. And I think most people would take that to be like that. As of old, he will be full of joy, the son of Udalaki Aruni. So then we go on then. Aruni, okay, so then we come to Nachiketa's second wish. What is the second wish? So he makes a comment. He says, in connection with Sarva Loke na vayam kincha nasti na tatra tam na jaraya pibeti ube tirtva asanaya pipase shoka tigo modate swarage or swarga loke. All right. Swarga is heaven. In heaven, there is no fear. You are not there, and nobody is struck with fear because of old age. Having transcended both hunger and thirst and crossed over sorrow, one rejoices in the heavenly world. Most people want a heavenly existence, and most people in religion see that sarvaloge, that this swarge loge, is a kind of prize, a kind of paradise. And so every religion has this post-mortem condition that is based on the merit. You can put it in a different way. We spend our whole life saving up for a holiday, and then we go and spend it all this merit, in a holiday camp called heaven. Some fulfillment of a desire which is there. In there, of course, there's no fear, there's no pain. None of these things that are beset in the waking state are there. If you want to compare it to our realm of consciousness, it's something like a dream. A dream can be like a paradise. And many things that we can't do here, as it were, on this earth, we can do there. So in this heavenly world, it's understood. That seems to be most people's destiny. And to get merit or sustain this merit, what is necessary? How will we do this? So this question was asked. O death, such as you are, you know that fire, in other words, that ritualistic procedure, by lighting a fire is the symbol of leading the devotee forward, onward to the highest. And the highest in this context is God, in a kind of standard way that religion views it. That is a Lord of all beings, a Lord of all creatures. This realm, this is the realm really of Brahma. This is the realm of cosmic mind. So what do we have to do? How do we construct this fire? Of that, please tell me, I'm full of faith that you will tell the right thing, faith in the scripture. The dwellers of heaven, they get immortality. This I asked for through the second boon. Now you may well be confused because the third boon is also about immortality. But immortality in this context is a relative immortality, endless years you live. And all it means is that you're living for a seemingly infinite period of time, but it will end. It will end. A different time zone is given there. And so the dwellers of heaven get immortality. And this I ask for the second boon. That's the second one. It's leading you onwards and upwards to more and more subtle areas. So tell me that by worshipping which, that fire, by worshipping which, the dwellers of heaven, those who have got heaven as their place of attainment, the sacrifices, get this immortality, in other words, this divinity, this particular divine status. And that fact, which is etat, this knowledge of fire, Vrane, I seek for, diviti yena varena, through the second boon. This is the promise of death. And just to finish that off, O Nachiketa, being well aware of that fire that is conducive to heaven, I shall tell you of it, that very thing you understand with attention from my words, that fire which is the means for the attainment of heaven, and which is the support of the world, know to be established in the intellect of the enlightened ones. People who are enlightened, they understand it. So that's the second boon. It's easily granted, as I mentioned before. And so he teaches him that fire. But the third boon is the most difficult. And this is what we want to examine. Just to preempt us a little bit, supposing a person was offered a number of things, and we can update these examples. Supposing a person was offered unlimited Rolls Royces. Here in the ancient days, they're called chariots. See, supposing that was offered. Supposing one was offered companions, attractive companions, many of them. For men, women, for women, men, say. Supposing we were offered unlimited things that please the ear, music. Supposing we had our choice eternally on, I don't know, Spotify, not without adverts. Supposing we were offered unlimited power, unlimited wealth. Supposing we were given unlimited lifespan, in a sense. Supposing we could get our youth completely, no old age. Supposing we were offered all these pleasures, any pleasure you could even think of, ever think of, permanent holiday. Would you take it? Nachiketa spurns all of these, realizing that none of these will be in any way permanent. They will all be temporary. They all will fall apart. They will all be subject to this birth-life-death process. And none of them will produce an eternal level of happiness. None of them. So actually, we are all looking for these kinds of things. And generally speaking, we channel this search for happiness through the senses. In other words, through the outer world. And these can be extremely subtle. They can be to do with how we wish to be seen by others. They can be to do with status. It can be to do with extremely subtle things. But as long as we view ourselves as this body, and by extension, the environment there, the field in which we operate, of various people and places and events, we won't get this happiness that we are looking for. Very often when I give talks to people who haven't studied this or don't know anything about it, and they said, what will you speak on? I select a subject such as the source of happiness. In other words, I'm not saying that it is to do with the Upanishads or to do with certain principles contained in Vedanta or to do with yoga, but no doubt the implication is there as I unfold the talk. Because essentially, the subject source of happiness is relevant to everybody. Everybody wants it. And as I often say, I've never met anybody who sits down and says, my goal is to be unhappy. My goal is to be unfulfilled. This is a common theme. And it is a driving force that we have as humans. And for such a young boy, Nachiketa, to be offered unlimited things, supposing you had the wealth of a Bill Gates, what would you do? How would you spend your wealth? If you add to the pressure and say, supposing you had the wealth of Bill Gates and you had 3 months to live, what would you do? How would you spend this money? The answers may well be very interesting, and it will be individual to each one of you. But this is the temptation that Nachiketa is offered. Please don't ask this boon of everlasting life. Prove that you are worthy of understanding it. And it's a very difficult thing because most people faced with a choice of what is called shreyas and prayas, the preferable versus the pleasurable, will choose the pleasurable. This is how much we are attached to this world of being born and living and dying. We don't register it in this way. So this is the introduction to the most profound philosophy that we have and the practical answers to these questions. What is the source of happiness? We'll leave it there and pick it up next Saturday, next week. So, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.